We thought it would be fun to take a look back at some of the kookier moments in our inaugural history.
Well, our next guest has written all about those moments. His book is called Democracy's Big Day, the Inauguration of Our President. Jim Bendat joins us from our LA Bureau. Good morning.
Good morning, Steve, and good morning, Edie.
All right. I tell you what, Jim, let's start at the beginning. George Washington, what did he do wrong?
Well, he didn't do too much wrong at all, actually. He was a big hero. And it turns out that the very Bible that George Washington used at the very first inauguration in 1789 will also be used this Saturday by George W. Bush.
Wow, that's a pretty old book. I bet they can't even open it now.
Well, it's stored actually at the Masonic Temple in New York City, and this will be about the 6th time it's been used since 1789.
Incredible.
Now, one of the things that George Washington did was he had his prepared text, I understand, but then he decided to do some ad-libbing, didn't he?
Well, he added the words, "So help me God," which is not actually part of the inaugural oath, but every single president since then has done the same thing except one, Teddy Roosevelt in 1901, following the assassination of William McKinley.
All right, Andrew Jackson, when he took office in 1829, it was memorable, wasn't it?
It really was.
Why?
That was the wildest inaugural party of all time. Jackson was a real populist, and he was a real outsider coming into Washington. And he decided to invite anybody who wanted to come to the White House following the swearing in. And in they came wearing rags and wearing muddy boots, and they completely trampled the White House that afternoon. They destroyed the furniture, they destroyed the china, and finally the fiasco ended when someone got the brilliant idea of moving a couple of tubs of whiskey out of the White House and putting them onto the White House lawn.
Oh, very
Slowly
nice.
but surely everybody moved out.
That's great. Now, we understand that George W. Bush's inaugural speech is probably going to be only about 12 or 13 minutes long, and that's a lesson that perhaps he learned from President William Henry Harrison.
Indeed, 1841. Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address in history, nearly 2 hours in length. It went on a cold day. And poor Mr. Harrison, who was at that time our oldest president, he was 68 years old, he extended himself a bit too much. He went to all the inaugural balls. It was the first time they had as many as 3. He went to all of them. It was an extremely cold day. He caught pneumonia, and he died exactly 1 month later.
Oops.
James Buchanan, 1857, he was a little ill also, wasn't he?
Yes, that was rather unfortunate. There was a gastro ailment going.
Hold on one second. Let's take that
We got
picture
James
down.
Buchanan up.
He looks just like that.
Got a lot of hair mousse in his...
He looks a whole lot like Andrew Jackson there.
Well, whatever. James Buchanan.
James Buchanan. There was an ailment going on around Washington, D.C. at that time. It was called the hotel disease. And poor Mr. Buchanan had the runs that day. He had a doctor by his side at all times. And I also think it's interesting to note that 1857 at his inauguration, that was the first one ever televised. Excuse me, that was the first one that was ever photographed.
Right.
But fortunately, we should all be relieved to know that the only known photographs from that day were of the ceremony itself.
Now, the hotel disease, I think these days means you wind up stealing a lot of hotel towels, but that's completely different. Jim's going to return with some of the more memorable inaugural moments of the recent past, featuring actual videotape. Stay with us. You're watching Fox and Friends. It's 12 minutes before the hour.
We are back with Jim Bendat. He's the author of the book Democracy's Big Day, the Inauguration of Our President, and he has some more odd inaugural moments to share. Moving a little closer to modern time, Andrew Johnson. We had asked the question before about who had had a little too much imbibing beforehand. What happened with him?
This occurred when he was Abraham Lincoln's vice president in 1865. And on his inauguration day, Johnson was not feeling well. And someone suggested to him that he drink some alcohol to take care of his ailment. Now, in those days, unlike today, the vice president actually gave an inaugural address just as the president does, but not anymore. And Johnson might be part of the reason, because when he got up there and gave his inaugural address, he was drunk. He was incoherent. He was rambling. No one could understand a word he was saying. People were holding their heads in embarrassment and shame. And even President Lincoln told one of the marshals, make sure Johnson doesn't speak outside.
And was that the last vice president then that actually gave a speech at the inauguration?
No, actually, it continued up until 1933. In those days, the vice president was sworn in a different location inside the Senate chamber, because after all, the vice president is the president of the Senate. But usually the vice president would just say hello to the new senators and that sort of thing.
And here, Jim, I thought the drunkest president was former President Jack Daniels. Hey, Ulysses S. Grant, a legendary boozer, but at his inaugural, the problem was not with the hooch.
The problem in 1873 at Grant's second inauguration was really the weather. It was very, very cold. In fact, it was so cold that instruments froze during the parade, and at the inaugural ball, someone forgot to heat the place where the ball was held. So people were trying to dance in their long overcoats. The food was frozen. It was a terrible situation. And one of the saddest things of all was that they had brought in some beautiful canaries to chirp away for the guests, and the poor canaries froze to death.
Oh my gosh! Well, you know, we're looking to the inauguration on Saturday, and there are going to be a lot of protesters. In history, though, where were the most protesters?
That was definitely Richard Nixon's two inaugurations, both in 1969 and 1973. As many of us remember, the Vietnam War was raging at the time, and there were lots of anti-Vietnam War protests for both of Nixon's inaugurations. And in fact, in 1973, some eggs were even thrown at the presidential limousine. A number of people were arrested on both dates.
Now, Jim, one of the presidents who gave the Secret Service in recent times the biggest Maalox moment was Jimmy Carter, when he decided, I just can't, I'm too cooped up in this car.
That's true. Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter walked the entire parade route, as you're now seeing. They're the only ones to do that. Since Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter did that in 1977, Bill and Hillary Clinton walked part of the way, as did George and Barbara Bush. We don't know what will happen this Saturday, but that's really the most famous thing that happened at Jimmy Carter's inauguration.
And what about Ronald Reagan and the Super Bowl?
Well, we've got the Super Bowl coming up a week after the inauguration, and in 1985 they actually fell on the same day. Whenever the inauguration falls on a Sunday, they have a private ceremony on Sunday and then a public ceremony the next day on Monday. And that's what happened in 1985. And on the Sunday, January the 20th, 1985, that was actually the same exact day as Super Bowl 19 between the San Francisco 49ers and the Miami Dolphins.
And a lot of Super Bowl people watched the president, didn't they?
They certainly did. And in between his two swearings in, Reagan actually flipped the coin to start the Super Bowl. They put his image up on the big video screen at Stanford Stadium, and he flipped the coin to start the game.
This is the kind of stuff you get in the new book called Democracy's Big Day, the inauguration of our president. Jim Bendat, thank you very much for joining us live from Los Angeles, and we'd also like to thank the Los Angeles Power Authority for keeping the lights on during that entire interview.
It's an interesting book.